Today is October 10th, 2022. It is the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles. So on this episode, Joshua Erickson and I are continuing our discussion on the feast and holy days of the Jewish calendar. This is installment number 3 of that series. Now again, I strongly recommend that if you haven't heard it, go back and listen to episode number 15. That episode sets the table for the entire series. Then listen to episodes number 27 and 28. The reason for this is, as I've had these conversations with Joshua, I began to see that the Lord instituted these feast and holy days to build on top of one another. There's a certain heavenly momentum that I feel like the Lord is trying to convey through the Jewish calendar. On this episode, Joshua and I cover what the Feast of Tabernacles is, what it is in memory of, how it was celebrated anciently, how it is celebrated today, and finally the lessons and principles we can take away from the Feast of Tabernacles. And that's next on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. So I just want to take a moment to thank you, the listener. When I started this podcast, I wasn't sure if anyone would really listen. Now, to my surprise, this thing has taken on a life of its own. And that's all due to you, the listener, spending your time here with me, and it means a great deal to me. Now, as a husband and father, I'm keenly aware of how important time is. It feels like there's just never enough of it. So when you are spending your time here listening to this podcast, I feel a responsibility to never waste your time. In that spirit, as this podcast has grown, I feel like I need to do you, the listener, justice. I want to continue to produce good content and upgrade the audio quality. That takes better equipment and better software, and that all takes money. Now, I've tried to advertise, but you'd be surprised. There's not a lot of people wanting to advertise on a Mormon Fundamentalist podcast. I know, surprising, right? Now, if you want to help support the podcast, you can do that one of two ways. The first is go over to MormonRenegade.com and hit the donate tab. There you can make a one-time donation, or you can go ahead and set it up to be a monthly recurring donation. Your choice entirely. Now, option number 2, because I'm a capitalist, if you want to head on over to MormonRenegade.com, click on the store button, you're going to find that we've got some new swag out. We got some t-shirts, we have a tote, we have cell phone cases, water bottles, coffee cups. We got a bunch of stuff, and more is going to be on the way. So, if you feel like that's something you could do, again, head on over to Mormon Renegade and check all that stuff out. If you're not in that position to do so, I completely understand. We're all squeezed right now with high gas prices and high inflation. So even if you can't, please keep listening and maybe keep the podcast in your prayers so we can continue to grow, produce good content, and better audio quality. Thank you. All right, well, welcome back, man.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So last time we talked about Yom Kippur.
Yep.
And now we're on to Tabernacles.
That's right.
The Feast of Tabernacles. What is it?
Oh, the Feast of Tabernacles is probably has the most symbolism, and this is the culmination of the feast cycle, basically.
Is it?
It is, yeah, and it's the culmination of this Earth as well. This is millennial symbolism here.
Ooh.
So this is good stuff. So let me read what Leviticus says. Just the end of it. This is going to be on the 15th day of the 7th month, and it lasts for 7 days. There's a week-long celebration, and then on the end there's what's called the 8th day of assembly, and it's kind of it's related to Tabernacles, but it is a separate day. And anyway, exciting.
I'm getting
stuff.
the vibe that in the 7th month there wasn't a lot of work getting done in Israel.
Yeah, you might be right. Now, when it comes to the week of Tabernacles, the first day, and this basically mirrors. There's actually a nice correlation between the first month and the 7th month.
Okay.
In the first month, the first day of the first month, the scriptures say is the new year. Okay, and then in the first day of the 7th month is the Feast of Trumpets, which traditionally is also understood to be a new year as well, and for good reason. Okay, and then we have the 10th of the first month is when the lamb for Passover is selected.
Okay,
and then in the 10th of the 7th month we have the Day of Atonement, and then on the and then the 14th is Passover, and then the 15th is a week-long celebration of unleavened bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We'll talk more about all these later. But and then in the 7th month, then we have, starting on the 15th, we have this 8-day celebration as well, like kind of in the middle there. So, and for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the first day is a Sabbath and the last day is a Sabbath. And for Tabernacles, the first and the last days are also considered Sabbaths.
So, is there other names that Tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles?
Yeah, it is the Feast of Ingathering.
Okay,
and it's also called, Tabernacles in Hebrew it would be Sukkot.
Okay,
Which in the English equivalent of that is booths, sometimes called the Feast of Booths. And that's referring to these temporary dwellings, these temporary shelters that they would make, that they're commanded to make, and to kind of dwell in during this week-long celebration.
So you're kind of like leaving behind, if I'm understanding, you're leaving behind kind of like your plush existence, so to speak, right?
Yeah, there's all kinds of symbolism that we can draw from this, and one of them is, that we're gonna set aside. We're gonna set aside, exactly, our plush existence, and we're going to feel what it feels like to be pilgrims, to be wanderers, to be strangers in a strange land, like our ancestors did. So let me read what I was going to read in Leviticus. And ye shall keep it a feast unto the Lord 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. Ye shall celebrate it in the 7th month. Ye shall dwell in booths. In Hebrew, that's sukkah or sukkot. You shall dwell in Sukkot 7 days. All that are Israelite born shall dwell in Sukkot. That your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Jehovah your God. And Moses declared unto the children of Israel the feasts of the Lord. So, right there, we're given one of the reasons, right, is so that you can remember that this is God speaking, that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths. Now, a lot of times when we think about the 40 years in the wilderness, we think about that as a curse.
Right.
But that's a little bit misplaced, because it's kind of like the tablets. Like the law was not the curse. The curse was having the higher Melchizedek.
You could have had more.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because that will often be how it is for some of us at the final judgment. We could have had so much more.
That's exactly right. And so the wandering in the wilderness, that also was not the curse. The curse was not the promised land.
Right.
You see, they were blessed in the wilderness, tremendously blessed. Like if what happened to them in the wilderness is a curse, then may I be cursed similarly, because they had the pillar of fire and the shadow guiding them constantly. It was right there. God's presence was with them. It's like, what a curse, and for protection and for direction, and they had manna from heaven. All their needs were taken care of. The scriptures even say, in Deuteronomy it says, even their shoes and their clothes did not wear out for 40 years. Like everything was
crazy.
Everything was provided. So that was not the curse. That was a blessing. Like God was with them, and this is why this is the symbolism of tabernacles is related to the millennium. When, as we said, what is it? 10th article of faith. Christ, the earth will be renewed and receive its parasitic glory, and the Christ will reign personally upon the earth. Like the Lord is going to be with us again there, and so that's the symbolism, part of the symbolism. Okay, now what else can we remember? So one is the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness. As Mormons, we have other wanderings in the wilderness that we can remember too, right? I mean, the Book of Mormon starts with a family wandering in the wilderness, right? Lehi and his family, they're in the wilderness 8 years before they, which is a symbolic number, right? It's 8 years and then they get in the water. So, to enter the promised land. So, That's cool. The Jaredites also wandered. And, of course, even more recently than that, we have Mormon pioneers. Yeah.
Right.
And that is often called the Mormon Exodus. Right.
Right.
And for good reason. And there's all kinds of, even to the place where we ended up.
Yeah. By a salty sea, by a salty lake.
Connected by a river, which we named River Jordan, that connects to a freshwater lake.
Yep.
So, yeah. So it's that's one of the things. We can remember what our ancestors did. Another thing is we remember our own wandering. So I'm going to go to the book of Hebrews here. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Hebrews chapter 11. Starting with verse 8. This is talking about all the all those faithful people. There's a big list of faithful people, and Abraham is one of them. Verse 8 starts, "By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, he obeyed. And he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and with Jacob, and heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God." So I'll keep reading. "Through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky, and the multitude, and the sands which are by the seashore innumerable. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth." Okay, and it goes on that they were mindful. Well, I'm going to keep reading. Sorry, I'm going to read a couple more. "For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city." So beautiful stuff there, but it says, Abraham and his family, they sojourned in tabernacles in a strange country. Said they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. And that is our position too, that we are strangers here. And this is not our, at least the earth as it is, this is not our home.
Right.
When we're trying to, like it says, we're trying to find, like Abraham was, a promised land. We're trying to find a promised city. We're trying to find that heavenly city. Right? And that's what our sojourn here on the earth is all about, is making our way back to the place where we came from.
I want to talk about that a little bit more, because I think it's so important that we recognize that while our ultimate hope and goal as Mormons here on in this earthly state is to make Zion, to build Zion, it all has to start personally first, right?
Yes.
One of the reasons I named the podcast what I did, The Mormon Renegade, and I think it's been lost a little bit in the sense that I haven't done a real good job of explaining it, is that I think initially people think, well, he's not with the LDS Church and that makes him a renegade. And maybe. But I think more than anything else, if you look at the pattern that God seems to use when you decide you really want to work with God, that you're ready to do that, is he's going to call you out of wherever it is you're comfortable. And you're going to have to go a little bit renegade in order to find him. Moses didn't sit in and how can we change
Right.
It was like, no, get up, get out.
Flee.
Right? And it's still the same charge today. Get out of Babylon and go establish something different. On a much more personal level, we have to be willing to forsake some of those Babylonian trappings, if you will, to begin to sojourn in a wilderness.
Yes.
Where you basically look up in the heavens and you talk to God and you say, you got my back? Because I hope so, because I'm doing what it is you're asking me to do. Help me out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the beautiful things here is that it's a call back to this idea. The Feast of Tabernacles is a call back to this idea of going out, of making that sojourn wherever it is He's going to lead you.
Yeah. There's the whole Exodus is in one enormous parable.
Yep.
And it is beautiful. Like there is even if they had been a little more enthusiastic about entering the promised land, there still would have been this period of dwelling in the wilderness in tabernacles between when they were freed from Egypt to when they obtained the promised land. They ended up wandering in the wilderness a little longer, but still that intermediate place is important. That's the difference between this justification and sanctification.
Right.
Justification is when our sins are forgiven, when we're redeemed, so to speak, and that happened with the Passover. They were redeemed from Egypt and sin and the bondage and slavery and all that, but they were not sanctified yet, which means holy. Right? Justified means not guilty. You can be not guilty and still not be holy.
Right.
So they needed there's a time, and sanctification is a process of refinement to become holy, so that you can receive the promised land. Right? So it's and the bigger parable, like we kind of read it there in Hebrews, but it says it's interesting that Abraham started out in the promised land, and then he ends up and this is interesting too. I mean, it starts with Abraham, who is a type and shadow of the Father. He is the father of the faithful, right? And then there's the three patriarchs, right? And we have this idea of this Godhead,
right?
And then Jacob has 12 sons, which become the nation of Israel, right? And then all of his descendants, they end up going to Egypt. Like they started out, they were in the promised land. This is just like us. This is our story. We were in the promised land with our father.
Right.
And we all come down to the world, which is Egypt. And then we're enslaved, and there's all kinds of corruption. And eventually we're redeemed. And we start this journey back to the promised land. But the promised land is where we started.
Right.
And we are going back there. And then there's, we go through, we're baptized. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, let's see, 1 Corinthians 10. This is just how we are Israel, and we are, when we think about tabernacles, we're remembering what it is like to be an Israelite. But he says, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all did eat the same spiritual meat, and all did drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." So it says, right, the symbolism of Israel leaving Egypt and going through the sea, that was their baptism as a nation, right? But we individually, we do the same thing. Like when we are baptized, we are leaving Egypt behind.
Right.
And then we're going out into the wilderness where we have, but it says that they had the cloud that followed them, which is in our case is a representation of the Spirit,
right?
Guiding us, the fire and the wind, right? That's the Hebrew words that are related to Spirit that guides us through the wilderness until we get to the promised land, and there's this second water that we have to pass, which was the Jordan, that split as well, right?
Right.
And it's Joshua, right, who is Jesus, takes us into the promised land. And then we're back where we started. Now there's work to do there still too. But the whole, sometimes it's called the Hexateuch. There's the Pentateuch, and then the Hexateuch is
Right.
Joshua in there, and it's a parable of from pre-existence coming to earth, and then our struggle to return to the place that we came from. So those are the things that one of the things that we remember. I was going to read one other, just talking about our own sojourn. Yeah. Moroni, chapter 9, verse 6. And now, my beloved son, notwithstanding their hardness, let us labor diligently. For if we should cease to labor, we should be brought under condemnation. For we have a labor to perform whilst in this tabernacle of clay, that we may conquer the enemy of all righteousness and rest our souls in the kingdom of God. So we have these tabernacles of clay that we are dwelling in, and we are also strangers and sojourners. So it's interesting. Another thing that the first time that tabernacles are mentioned is with Jacob, and Jacob separates himself from Esau. Right? He goes out.
Right.
He says that he makes sukkahs or sukkot, these tabernacles for his livestock. And so when we go and we are now dwelling in sukkahs, that is kind of also a reminder of our place as livestock. In other words, we are God's flock,
Right.
sheep, right? And he is the shepherd. And so here we are putting ourselves kind of in that position to remember that. And it's even more than that. Another thing that we remember is not only that we are in tabernacles, but also that that the Word was made flesh.
Right.
That Jesus came down, condescended, and tabernacled with us as well. And the scriptures talk about that. There's a number of verses, and I won't go to those. We all are familiar with that probably, but God came down and tabernacled with us, right, in the form of Jesus, and was a man among us. And this ties into the millennial significance again, is that we believe that, again, physically there will be, God will be here on the earth, and Jesus will be king then.
So let me just make sure that we've got our heads wrapped around this fully here. So, this is in remembrance of Israel's journey through the wilderness.
Yeah.
It is a time to remember that, hey, we're all on this journey spiritually, and it's a way for us to hearken back to what it was Israel had to go through and kind of see that through their eyes.
Yeah.
And also pointing towards a parable of the journey we're all on, coming from a promised land into mortality, and then ultimately our quest to get back home.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. That's one, that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is, well, let me I said this has millennial significance. So, I read in Leviticus chapter 23, and all the feasts have this language too. It says, "Do this forever
Right.
throughout your generations." And Feast of Tabernacles is obviously no different.
All right. What scripture was that, Josh?
Zechariah chapter 14 is where I'm going to be at, and this is talking about there's the second coming of the Lord. And in verse 4, it talks about his feet standing on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives splitting. And we know about that stuff. But after all of that, then really interesting, you go to verse 16. And I'll start there. "And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem. So, after this big battle, Armageddon,
Right.
there will be people left over. And it says, of all the nations, everyone that's left shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This is into the millennium here. Everyone needs to come up. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them will be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be a plague wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come up not to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all the nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles.
So this one actually has a penalty associated with it, if you will, if you don't keep this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all do, no doubt. This one is explicit, though, that at least one of the penalties is no rain.
Right.
And so this is another thing that the Feast of Tabernacles historically and symbolically, like we just read, has been connected with the coming of rain. And so this is actually kind of at the end of the dry season in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem actually gets a pretty fair amount of rain. But the problem is that it all comes in one rainy season. Yeah. And so if the rain doesn't come, everything's dry and dying by the time the rains come again. And so one of the themes of Tabernacles is this prayers for rain, and which is tied to life and their prosperity, their crops, and all of that. So it is one of the 3 pilgrimage feasts. Excuse me. So 3 times a year, all the males are supposed to come up to Jerusalem with their offerings. One is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. One is the Feast of Weeks, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. And these are all harvest parts of the harvest cycle. There's during the Feast of Unleavened Bread is when the barley harvest is happening, and then Feast of Weeks is when the wheat harvest is, and then Tabernacles is all the fruit, the figs and the grapes and the pomegranates and olives and all of those kind of things. So one of the purposes is to bring your offering to the Lord when your harvest comes in. Let's see. So there's some other things that are done. Actually, I want to say one other thing about the things that we are looking forward to, and the symbolism is that this is the marriage feast.
Okay.
This is when the scriptures in the New Testament and the Doctrine and Covenants, and they all talk about the wedding feast of the Lamb, or the bridegroom is coming, and all that. Well, yeah, the bridegroom's coming at trumpets, and final judgment is wrapping up at Yom Kippur, and then we're going to have us a wedding for whoever's left, for the righteous that are left over. There's going to be a marriage, and it's going to be and Tabernacles is it. That's the wedding feast. That's the wedding feast. Yeah. So that's the symbolism too, and so and that's of course obviously tied to the millennium and stuff. And there's interesting things when they make these sukkahs, these tabernacles, these booths. They'll make them out of natural materials. Like we have, walls. Those can be made out of anything, but it's traditional to have, especially on the roof, to have a bunch of branches you put up there, leafy branches, and that makes this shady covering for the tabernacle. And also, it's a common thing to decorate them too. And so one of the things that people will decorate them with is the fruit from their harvest. So you'll just have like nets or whatever, that have like apples and pomegranates and figs and whatever. And this actually is this kind of imagery is referred to in the scriptures in a number of places, and is actually interesting. I was reading about George Washington. Let's see if I can find that. Oh, there it is. There's this phrase that's repeated in the scriptures in a number of places. It says that every man will dwell under his own vine and his own fig tree, and that there will be peace throughout the land. That's in Micah 4:4 and 1 Kings 4 and in Zechariah 3:10. So it's a repeated thing. And I was reading about this phrase, under their vine and under their fig tree, as actually used by George Washington, like in his correspondence, like 50 times or something like that. This phrase, he loved that idea. But this is under the vine and under the every man under his own vine and fig tree is also tied to this idea of tabernacles, when finally all the nations have bowed, and the nations can, the people can rest too, and there's this time of peace. It's a millennium when we will be with the Lord.
One of the things I would say, especially about the Washington quote there that you just read, Washington was a guy who understood his place in history uniquely, perhaps more than most, because he understood that whatever he was doing was the first, right? And so he was very deliberate in what he did. So if that's something he says many times in correspondences and letters, I think it's probably worthwhile that we make note of that and explore that as individuals. Because my guess is, and we talked about this during the episode on Yom Kippur, he was very intentional when he made his covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on behalf of the country.
Yeah.
So there might be something worth exploring there.
Yeah. So now another thing that they'll decorate, that's traditional to decorate the sukkahs with, is pictures of your dead relatives, like your ancestors. You'd basically put them in the sukkah, and you would basically invite your ancestors to celebrate this time with you. And so obviously to Mormon ears, when we think about the millennium, then that has some real significance too. That of course the resurrection is going to be happening around then too, but it's going to be a time where families are reunited, and that's part of the celebration too.
I think that's super fascinating as well, because I think that's the one time, and I guess it depends on what your definition of graven image would be, but Jewish folks weren't necessarily super excited about any sort of image, right? And so to make this exception is, I think, speaks volumes to the point that the Lord is trying to get across in this celebration.
Yeah. Now that that having pictures, that's not a commanded thing. That's a traditional thing, but it is, I think, very fitting.
Right.
And so, okay. So what are some other things that we do to celebrate this? Now I mentioned the sukkah being built with leaves on the top,
right?
And that comes from Leviticus. There was some debate among ancient Jews though about what exactly the leafy branches were for. The Sadducees said, and groups who are associated with Sadducee ideas, they said that's for building the sukkahs, and there's really good evidence for that. And the Pharisees said, no, that's for waving when we say these prayers and we rejoice with these when we hold these branches in our hands. And so they kind of made a compromise, I guess. And Jews today do both. They'll make the sukkahs with leafy tops, and they'll also take this bundle of particular branches. There's a palm and a myrtle and a willow branches, and they hold them all together along with an etrog, which is a fruit from, like, it's just a citrus fruit, smells amazing, and they'll wave those kind of in their rejoicing and in their prayers. And there's definitely symbolism associated with that, especially with the palm branches, waving those to welcome the king, right? The Savior. Yeah, that was done in his triumphant entry, right? And in the book of Revelation, it talks about in the future, the saints, surrounding the throne and worshiping with palm branches in their hands. So there's, even in the New Testament, these things that are Jewish traditions and not necessarily commanded, they still amazingly show up as something that is meaningful.
Sure.
So,
okay, let me stop you for a second, and I apologize because I'm kind of slow, so you'll have to walk me through this. I'm trying to understand how this was observed anciently, right? So we said at one point that this was a time for the ingathering of the harvest, right? When everyone would make this pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Is that correct? Yep. Now, at the same time, it sounds like you're making these booths or whatever.
Yeah.
So in making those booths, I could understand how those making the pilgrimage to Israel would do it, right? Because chances are it's an overnight trip at least. That's right. But what about the people living in Jerusalem? Yeah, were they then exiting Jerusalem?
No, they would stay there
to make these booths.
They would stay there, and they would build this. Basically, you set up a tent in your backyard.
Okay, all right.
That's the idea.
Okay,
and you go we like to go camping basically for this time. There's not a temple to bring the produce to and stuff. Although this year we are going to go out to Missouri and go visit the temple law there, so kind of do a little pilgrimage there. But just live in a tent, and we usually will throw a couple of branches on top of the tent, to keep both the spirit and the letter of the law. But yeah, people who live in Jerusalem, they'll go out in their yard, front yard or backyard or whatever, and build a little hut for them to go out. And sometimes they'll sleep out there. Sometimes they'll eat out there. They'll go have take their meals out there, and it's just a place for the family to gather and talk, and they just have parties. It's interesting. Like one of the commandments, it connected to tabernacles is to be happy. That is
really
that is a commandment. Let's see. Go back to Leviticus 23. Let me just scan through here. Oh yeah, verse 40. And ye shall take you on the first day boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and boughs of thick trees, and the willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. It is a commandment to rejoice, and it was the most joyous of all the festivals, and the most joyous time of the year. One of the ways that they would celebrate anciently is, and this is kind of connected with their prayers for rain, is there would be this procession that would start at the Gihon spring,
mm-hmm.
and like the pool of Siloam, and they would draw from the well there, from the pool, some water, and they would take it to the tabernacle, and along with wine they would pour it out, and this was according to ancient people who observed this ceremony, it's called the water libation ceremony, that they said any person who has not seen this does not know what joy is. Like the atmosphere was so charged with the spirit of this season and the joyful anticipation of all the things that are to come, and the joyful remembrance of all the blessings of the past, just kind of compressed at this moment of time. And it was amazing, according to those who have witnessed it in the past. Now, this is interesting, though, because this ties in with some New Testament stuff and what Jesus did. Of course, because all of these things are pointing to Jesus in one way or another. He is, these are all shadows of things that he did, and shadows of things that are still to come, no doubt. But let's see, in John chapter 7, there's a description of one of these Feast of Tabernacles. Feast of Tabernacles was coming, and he was there, and let's see. like 37 through 38. So 37 starts off, says, in the last day, that great day of the feast. What are we talking about? Talking about the last day of Tabernacles. Yep. Which means this is when they would do that water pouring ceremony. And this is when the whole crowd and everyone who's watching was at this like height of joy and celebration. And then it says Jesus stood and cried out like with this loud voice.
Right.
And interrupted this ceremony. And said, if any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink.
Wow.
He that believeth on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. Okay. And this was like super shocking because he just interrupts this whole procession and basically says, you see all this stuff you're doing? Like, that's because of me. And, so obviously this doesn't make people very happy. In verse 43, there's a division among the people because of him. And some of them would have taken him, but no man laid his hands on him. Everyone was just shocked. Then in verse 45, it says, the officers of the chief priests and the Pharisees, they said to, the guards, there's soldiers there.
Right.
Who were to keep order. They said, why have you not brought him? And the officers said, never did man speak like this man. Like, we were just
riveted.
We were dumbfounded by what he was saying and couldn't believe our ears and our eyes. So, like, what do you, like, sorry we didn't get him, but we didn't even think about that. We were just so amazed at what was happening. So, anyway, part of the ancient celebration too was these lights. And there was the menorah, the lampstand, the 7-branched menorah that was in the holy place, which was a symbol of the tree of life, being guarded by the angel with his flaming sword. And most of the normal people wouldn't go in there. But out in the courtyard of the temple, they had like 4 giant replicas, basically, that you have to like climb up on a ladder to light, and they would have these big fire lighting ceremonies as part of the Feast of Tabernacles too. And then in John chapter 8, like probably Jesus interrupts this again, or at least it's around this time, and Jesus says, "I'm the light of the world. You're doing this all again because of me."
So the Savior is very much using. Well, he used Passover as well.
Yeah.
Right, and now he's using these feasts to illustrate the point. Look at me. Look. Not in a prideful way, but here. Look here.
In an honest way.
In an honest way.
It is an honest way.
Right. This is a fulfillment of these things.
Yeah. So there's so much there with the wedding feast and the millennium. And, the work of Jesus, him being the light, him being the water, waters of life, all good stuff. All good things to think about. And, of course, think about our ancestors, ancient Israel, and our pioneer ancestors. And to think about that we will be with those ancestors again.
Right.
When the millennium comes. And so that's all tied up in this symbolism. So the Feast of Tabernacles is a lot of things. So I mentioned it is this ingathering. It's called the Feast of Ingathering. So part of it is this harvest festival. And so I want to say something interesting about I know we've talked about the founding fathers and the pilgrims who came here. Like, they all had this sense of, we are doing Israelite stuff. Like, this is a new promised land, and we are this continuation of Israel. Right? The pilgrims had a definite sense of that. And the very first Thanksgiving was a Feast of Tabernacles. And I don't know if you've heard that before.
I have,
but
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely was. Now, we're actually not sure when that first feast was.
Yep.
From the historical records, from what I read, like, we can narrow it down to somewhere between September 21st and November 11th.
Yep.
Of 1621.
And that's funny you should bring that up, because I made some notes here that Tabernacles sounded awfully a lot like our Thanksgiving, right? Yeah, I mean,
it is.
It's remarkable to see that. And as I've mentioned before, that those who came across, especially the pilgrims, had a very definite sense that this was a continuation of the Israelite story, that this was the latter-day part, right down to Winthrop saying, "And the God of Israel shall dwell amongst us."
It's good stuff. You know, your comment you made a while ago, it was in the last podcast, about where is America, in the
right
scriptures. And I think you're right. A lot of it is like we have kind of plugged ourselves into Israel, and we are like there. That's where America is in the scriptures, is every time it's talking about Israel. And I believe there are some other references too, but I think that's a good kind of interpretive tool. One thing I didn't mention back on the Feast of Trumpets, but we talk about the Feast of Trumpets being this new beginnings. One that I forgot to mention, but that I usually talk about with my family, is that the Constitution of the United States was Rosh Hashanah. Is when there's this new, the birth of the new nation. It's true we had the Declaration, but when America finally gets into the form that it's basically in now, that was a Rosh Hashanah thing. So that's another thing to think about.
Did you ever hear the story about Adams and Jefferson, about their later life?
I know they died on the same day, right?
Well, it goes a little deeper than that, and I find this very telling. First off, you got to kind of understand Deuteronomy, and I'm sure I know less about Deuteronomy than you do, Josh, but Deuteronomy really is the Lord telling Israel, this is how you're going to govern as a nation, right? That's where they talk about, the Lord tells them, don't be a debtor nation, don't go into debt, all these other things. There's a falling out. Now fast forward to the founding fathers, Jefferson and Adams. There's a falling out, a significant falling out. They were good friends, then there was this falling out, and they didn't talk for years, and then later in life they come back together. And they start exchanging letters. And as is Adams' kind of personality, he's a little pessimistic. And he writes to Jefferson, he says, we really screwed this up. We should have put more Deuteronomy into the Constitution. And Jefferson writes back, and he says something very profound. He says, don't worry, and I'm paraphrasing, at some point they're going to see what we were trying to do, and they will make it right. Meaning they being later.
They being us.
Yes.
You and me, Dave.
Yep, absolutely. They'll understand what it is we were trying to do. Keep in mind, Jefferson also has a prophecy just a couple months before his death. And you can find this in Skousen's book about Joseph Smith. It's a 2-volume series where Jefferson basically has a dream, or he has a premonition that somebody from America will come up and restore Christianity's true principles.
Wow. Amazing.
So you have this, the founders felt it, right? That we very much are continuing this story. And I had one college professor who was very profound, who made the assertion that we are really, we tend to, especially in academic circles, hang our hats on this idea of we are simply continuing the story of Greece and of Rome. While certainly there are those strands, he made the case, we're a lot more like ancient Israel than what we are those Hellenistic societies. And I think when you start seeing the founders in that, and you start seeing some of the parallels like Tabernacles and Thanksgiving, you start to see that happening.
Yeah. No, there is a cultural struggle between Israelite and Greek ideas.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, America is unique because there is this tension between
the Hellenistic and the Hebrew.
Yeah, there is, absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. So, anyway, there's uncertainty about the dates, but some historians feel like the most likely date was September 29th, 1621, which, if you look on the calendar for that year, that was the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles.
That's crazy.
And I don't know if they knew that necessarily, but they certainly based their, maybe they did know, I don't know, but they certainly based their festival, their Thanksgiving festival, was based on what it says in Leviticus and what it says in Deuteronomy about having this, when you come in, it says when you, they'll read in Deuteronomy 26. The Lord brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, and with signs, and with wonders. And he brought us into this place, and has given us this land, even a land that flows with milk and honey. And there was certainly miracles that
Right.
Attended, those first pilgrims landing there, right in by Plymouth. So. And going on, and now behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which thou, O Lord, hast given me. And thou shalt set it before the Lord thy God, and worship before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice in every good thing which the Lord thy God hath given unto thee, and unto thine house, and unto the Levite, and the stranger who is among you. The strangers who are among you, you're supposed to invite them to this feast too. So they invited the Wampanoag tribe, right? And had a big feast. It lasted for days.
And so this was another question I was going to ask you. How did Israel respond when there were pilgrims in the land during that feast?
Yeah, they should, if they were keeping the commandments, which Israel didn't always. Then yeah, they should have. Every time there's a feast, they're supposed to invite the strangers. And because God said, you must remember and be kind to the stranger, because you were strangers in Egypt, and so don't forget what it was like to be a foreigner. And you don't want to be like the Egyptians were to you. So this is the golden rule: do unto others, do have them do unto you.
I think that's so fascinating, and I think it shows God's love in a lot of ways. Like, look, understand you're blessed in your station, right? But I expect you to bless the lives of those around you, even those who might not necessarily be of you.
Right.
I am expecting something more from you. And we can look at this and there's all sorts of ways of looking at it. I'm without getting too political, I'm pro-immigration, legal immigration, right? We got to secure that thing, but that's I think that's part of our divine mandate, and I think it's part of the divine mandate clear back to ancient Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understand where you come from.
Yeah.
Understand it was, God speaking to the country, to the nations. Understand it was my providence that brought you forth out of obscurity against the power of the time, whether that was Egypt or Britain, and understand that yes, I have blessed you, but I expect you to bless the lives of others.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And everyone was, everyone was expecting the strangers. You don't have to be. You can become Israelite. You can be grafted in.
Sure.
But even if you don't, you still. Everyone keeps the laws. The same. Yep. This is the same. It says over and over. There's one law for Israelites and the stranger who's among you, and then we can just live in harmony. So, no, good stuff. Now, I'm going to read a verse from Doctrine and Covenants 136, and this goes. So I'm going to kind of tie this into the restoration too. There's a lot of ancient things, but we have good reasons as Mormons, as Latter-day Saints, to celebrate these things too. One, we're Israel. Two, it's in our more recent heritage too. So Doctrine and Covenants 136, verse 37, is of course Revelation through Brigham Young. Therefore marvel not at these things, for you are not yet pure. Ye cannot yet bear my glory, but ye shall behold it, if you are faithful in keeping all my words that I have given to you. From the days of Adam to Abraham, from Abraham to Moses, from Moses to Jesus and his apostles, and from Jesus and his apostles to Joseph Smith, whom I did call upon by mine angels, my ministering servants, and by my own voice out of the heavens to bring forth my work. So I think that's powerful scripture.
That
I mean,
is
that's
powerful.
that's what I'm trying to do, is say, look, all the words from Adam to Abraham, from Abraham to Moses, from Moses to Jesus, and from Jesus to Joseph. Those are all God's words still, and he hasn't retracted any of them. So the keeping with this kind of Thanksgiving harvest festival thing now, that first Thanksgiving was actually, it did fall out at Feast of Tabernacles. But now we do it in November, which is later than that. But that's still fine. That's still keeping in the spirit of it. And those first saints who came into the valley, Salt Lake Valley, they had a hard time.
Yeah.
Getting a foothold. There was a drought that year, and then of course there's the whole thing with the crickets and things. But despite all of that, they still succeeded, which is incredible, because I can't even, modern day people. I'm a modern day person, and I am a weakling.
Dude,
I can't
I'm
even
soft.
imagine. Soft is the right word. I can't even imagine going to like a salty valley and trying to eke out an existence. Like, you better start plowing.
Dude, I would have been the biggest whiner on that thing. Like, first off, Brigham would have been like, okay, we're leaving Nauvoo. And I'm like, but we just built it.
I know.
We just built. Okay, fine. I think he could have got me onto the wagon,
train.
right?
Yeah.
I'd have complained the whole way over the mountains, all the way across Wyoming. And then when he would have got here, I'd have been like, look, I know you talk with God, but is it possible the line was fuzzy? Because I know if we just keep going west, there's this place called California. Have we thought this through? There's no way I could have done that, Josh.
I know. That's crazy. I'm gonna read some a little excerpt from The Lord's Holy Days by Lene Hadley Reed.
Okay.
She's actually quoting from the autobiography of Parley P. Pratt. He actually records this. Okay. It's probably recorded in other places too, but that's the reference for this. So when the saints had their first real harvest, and it was pretty good. It was, especially considering all the hardships they went through. It says that they made a bowery out of branches, or a booth. Yeah, and they covered it with willow branches. That's exactly right. And okay, I'm just gonna read here. First, let's see. First, they constructed a bowery of poles covered with willow branches. Ancient Israel had been commanded to make similar booths for their final harvest festival. And then she quotes from Leviticus, "And ye shall take the boughs of goodly trees and the willow of the brook and construct booths." The fact that this shelter was constructed right over the site erected for the temple would indicate that it had spiritual significance. Then they decorated the bowery with fruits of the harvest, as was done among the Israelites. And then they decorated a pole on which was hung a white flag, and it was symbolic in early America of freedom, and had been used by the saints earlier, such as at Council Bluffs, Iowa. It is significant. It signified their escape from oppression into freedom. They saw it now as representing their success as Latter-day Israel in obtaining the place God had prepared for them. But it is also reminiscent of the banners the ancient tribes of Israel bore as they came out from Egypt. Both were free and inheritors of a new promised land. Below the white banner was lifted up and hung a bundle of each of the harvested grains, wheat, barley, oats, and a single ear of green corn. This too was biblical and harvest related. It pertained to the offering of first fruits. And then she quotes from Leviticus as well. When ye come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then ye shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. And ye shall wave or lift up the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you. So they had entered the land given to them by the Lord. Or were these not the sheaves of the harvest lifted up in gratitude and thanksgiving to him? So anyway, says they fired the cannons. People cheered. gave a Hosanna shout, and this is part of the tabernacle symbolism of Jesus coming into the temple as well, right? So, anyway, according to Pratt, it was a great day with the people of these valleys, and long to be remembered by those who had suffered and waited anxiously for the results of a first effort to redeem the interior deserts of America and to make her hitherto unknown solitudes blossom as the rose. So, anyway, beautiful stuff there with our ancestors of all sorts, and that's what Tabernacles is about. I will say, so how do we celebrate it? There's a couple of things that we like to do. One is we'll make a sukkah. We usually just make it out of PVC.
Okay.
PVC pipes. We set up a little thing, and we put a tarp around the walls, and then we put branches on the top. Or sometimes we'll just use a tent and we'll go camping. Even if we don't go camping, though, sometimes we've just set up the sukkah in our backyard or a tent in our backyard. Some years we'll actually even we'll take the trampoline and we'll like drape blankets over the trampoline all the way around, and we'll put some branches on the top, and like the whole family will just like sleep out underneath the trampoline in a little fort, and it's just a really fun activity. It's also traditional to read Ecclesiastes.
Okay.
The book Ecclesiastes is really beautiful. It's one of the wisdom literature, right? And Ecclesiastes is kind of all about ephemeral things. Like it talks about how like temporary this life is, but we need to seek to keep the commandments and have joy in our labors, even though things are temporary. And so it's very fitting. A lot of the themes in Ecclesiastes fit right in with Tabernacles. Another thing that we do is we will have the sacrament every single day. Let's have it as like part of our meal.
Okay.
And just as a reminder of Jesus, definitely like in John 6, definitely makes this connection between the manna that they ate and his flesh, which is
right.
He is the bread from heaven, right? The manna is pointed. The manna was kind of pointed towards. So we'll have the sacrament every day during the Feast of Tabernacles as a reminder of the earthly manna and the heavenly manna, and it's just a good time. So that's pretty much it.
What do you take away when you do that?
It's like all the my answer to this question is the same all the time. It's just always good to have a time to remember all those things that we talked about. To remember my ancestors, and to remember my own position here as strangers on the earth, and to remember the blessings that God's given me. I'm in the wilderness. We are all in the wilderness right now, so to speak, and hopefully we're being led by the pillar and the cloud, and eventually we're looking forward to obtaining that holy city, that promised land, and that's we just have to keep that in mind, put our trust in God, and be thankful for all the blessings along the way and on this journey through the wilderness that we're all on.
Dude, I think that's awesome, and I think it's good. I love how it in some ways, Tabernacles forces us to look outward as well. Remember the pilgrim. You were once a pilgrim.
Yeah.
And I think that is just one more quiver we can have. One more arrow we can have in our quiver to help us sharpen our discipleship. Remember those. Well, look outside yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And remember what it was like. So, good stuff. Dude, as always, you're awesome. I love you. I love talking with you.
Glad being here.
What's our next one?
It's going to be Hanukkah.
Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which I'll give you a little preview.
Okay.
Hanukkah is the Feast of Tabernacles.
Really?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Awesome.
We'll talk about that next time.
Can't wait. Bye, everybody.